What's up? This is the Existential Stoic podcast, and today we're doing another listener suggested episode. This is from Alex B, so thank you. And I thought this was a really cool topic because this is something I brought up a couple times and it's been on my mind, which is Epicureanism relevant today? So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm Danny, I'm here with my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Yo, Danny. I thought you were going to start it with, do you like pleasure? Me too.
Me too. I also like pleasure. We're aiming for the pleasant life. Well, it's
Yeah.
funny because that's what if you ever get like a most ethics books when they cover like Epicureanism, they'll call like his conception of the good life the pleasant life. And it really is. And a lot of people misinterpret it as like hedonism, but it's really not hedonism. He's an interesting thinker because just to give you some background, you know, I'm not good with dates, but circa like 400 BC around there. But he started the Epicurean gardens, which so people just met in his garden. And a couple interesting things was he allowed slaves and he allowed women, which most of these you know, um, groups of thinkers, like, Plato's, the Academy or like the Lyceum with Aristotle, like they didn't allow women or slaves. It was just, the men who were citizens who could go and be a part. So Epicurus was already an outlier in that sense. He thought everybody
Very
had the
forward
ability.
thinker.
Yeah, he thought everybody had the ability to live a good life, to understand this stuff, to gain knowledge, to get better, essentially, which is kind of cool. He was also an atomist, so there's this ancient theory of atomism that thought that basically very similar to like our conception of atoms, but a more like neo form of it, like kind of simple form, or what do they call it? Whatever. Anyway, but essentially, everything's made of atoms, and that's where his theory is based on. So he thought that our body and our soul are composed of atoms, and when we die, they dissipate. So nothing persists after we die. The atoms actually go away. So he thought that there is no afterlife. There's nothing to worry about with the afterlife because he thought the biggest fears that bother us and causes anxiety are the fear of death, right? And the fear of like divine judgment and stuff. But he gets rid of all of those by using atomism. And he kind of, from my interpretation of him, I don't think he really believed in the gods. He basically he says the gods are like perfect and they want nothing to do with us. Because, back then, if you said there were no gods, that's blasphemy. You could have been killed. So he kind of like just talks about them as these like things that are abstract and far away, and they want really nothing to do with us. And so they don't deal with our lives, and there's no judgment. So he's an interesting thinker in that respect. And people were actually disciples of his for like 800 years. So his views were around for a long time, and then they sort of fell away Christianity and all that stuff. But it's interesting. So I think talking about him, he is very, I think, with so much anxiety and depression today, he is actually a pretty, he's a thinker that I think you can get a lot from and apply and, maybe help yourself live a better life. So we'll touch on some key points today, I think, that are worth looking at.
Yeah, and how you were talking earlier about kind of anxiety and depression. The first point we're going to talk about here is something that uh, is really interesting in terms of like anxiety and depression, where he says that pleasure is the highest good, and pleasure is defined as the absence of pain and mental disturbance.
Yeah.
Which is so cool because like that's literally the definition of depression and anxiety. It's like pain, emotional pain and mental disturbance. It's crazy. So like the highest good is just getting rid of those things, which is pretty cool.
And what's interesting too is he's not talking about like I think a lot of times when we think of pleasure, we always think of this elated state.
Mm.
And he's not really talking about that, I don't think. And if you look at his types of pleasures too, because he breaks down pleasures into three categories, which I think are really fascinating too, which is natural and necessary, right? So
Oh,
like,
we're gonna get into these. Yeah.
yeah, I want to get into all of them.
Mhm.
Yeah. So natural and necessary. And these are like things that we all need, right? So like, these are like you need food, you need clothing, right?
You need
Friendship,
sex.
yeah, all this stuff, right? You need these things to live a good life, and they're stuff that we have biological either urges for, like so you're hungry, you're gonna get hunger pains, right? You're gonna feel upset because you need food, or you need shelter, you're gonna die. So satisfying these are just necessary and they're natural to being a human being, right?
Mhm.
Then you have natural but unnecessary, and this is like you can kind of think of it as like elevating the natural and necessary. So like, instead of just like you're hungry, instead of just making peanut butter and jelly, you go to a fancy restaurant, right? Like
Mhm.
the food's, really like exquisite, gourmet, beautiful, awesome, tastes amazing, maybe a little expensive. So like it's something you can indulge in, but it's not really necessary
Or
for life.
or even it could be extrapolated to like kind of luxury type items in life. Because For instance,
Yeah,
like most people, especially in the United States, you need a car to get to work in most non-urban
you need a
areas. You need
phone,
a car.
right? Yeah.
But do you need, a Bentley or a Lamborghini or something like that? No, probably like a little Kia Sophia or whatever will work for you. So that would be kind of like the natural getting a better car or a better something like that than you actually need would be natural and unnecessary desires.
Yeah, I like that actually when you're thinking about it's interesting because when you're thinking about like contemporary society with like technologies and with the needs we have just to live in our society, the way it's structured, like cars are absolutely necessary in the US. You cannot get around otherwise. I mean, unless
Hmm.
you're in like there's a few cities where maybe you could. Beyond
Hmm.
that, though, it's really hard. Likewise, like you need a cell phone these days. You need some type of way to communicate with others. But do you need like the newest phone every 6 months? No. And I think
Right.
it's a nice way to kind of understand that as well. Like what's necessary for me to live in the world that I live in, and what's going beyond that, right? Like what's just adding to it, making more stress maybe in my life. And then my favorite
And
ones, though, yeah, go
that's
ahead.
what I was gonna say. I like these a lot too, but go into it.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say my favorite ones that he is the vain or empty, and he also calls these artificial desires. And so these are things that are actually, he says that they cause a lot of anxiety, a lot of dissatisfaction, and a lot of depression, and they're actually usually stuff that we pick up from outside of us externally. So this is like the desire for wealth, fame, power. It's all this stuff that society tells us we need or tells us we
Mhm.
should strive for, but that really isn't necessary and actually is going to cause us more harm than good long term.
And interestingly enough, isn't it funny that these things are all things that are completely out of your control?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always want
And
because he was around the time, because the Stoics like are roughly around like the early Stoics are roughly around his times. I mean, these ideas it's interesting because I always found this when you read ancient philosophy, especially like ancient Greek and stuff, there is a lot of overlap between the thinkers. And I always wondered like some of it must have been shared ideas, obviously, because they were aware of some of the other ideas going on and stuff. And then I wonder too if some of it was just like they kind of arrived at similar conclusions because they saw similar issues, right? And we're trying to understand them and resolve them. But yeah, I always found this one fascinating because, like, think of advertising. That's like the number one artificial desire, right? It's like something you don't need, you didn't even know existed, and then
Mhm.
you think you have a need for it all of a sudden because somebody tells you you need it, right? To be happy or to be better or to be good. And I
Yeah.
think this is probably, I think, one of the hardest ones for all of us today to deal with because we're advertised to nonstop. Like I was thinking about that the other day. Like even if you don't engage with social media a lot and stuff, it's like you're just constantly advertised to no matter what you do. Like I was trying to look up something. I forget I was trying to look up a news article, and it's like you get like two sentences of the story, and then it's like 47 ads that you have to scroll through
Hmm.
to get to the next, and it's just like nonstop. And now with the tracking and stuff, I mean, you just get it's all day, and so you're constantly
Hmm.
being told like you need this to be happy, you need this to be happy, you need this to live a better life. Or if you're on social media, right, you're constantly comparing yourself to these people who have all this stuff and like they're curating their life, and it just feels like impossible to live a good life if that's your bar, right? Or if that's
Hmm.
what you're trying to, aim to.
Absolutely.
I also think it's interesting
Yeah.
too, because the wealth, fame, power thing, like how many people who are wealthy and famous are unhappy? I mean, like,
Yeah.
most of them.
But it's crazy because that's what most people aspire to. They're like, I know it doesn't work for them, but for me.
But this time, it'll be
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Another thing that I like that he said is true happiness, which is what we're all kind of searching for. We all
We
want to be
hope,
happy.
right?
Before I answer what true happiness comes from, let's just postulate on some things that people think that happiness comes from. So we already mentioned them: money,
Yeah.
fame. Uh,
Recognition, renown, like that
oh
kind of
yeah,
stuff, right?
absolutely.
Being
The approval of others.
the approval of others. So I would argue, yeah, being the best at something because that also comes with that approval, right? Or that recognition. A lot of
Hmm.
it is very like self-centered, if you think about it.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, he says that true happiness comes from a life of simplicity, moderation, and inner peace.
Yeah.
So let's kind of break those. So like the simplicity thing, that's a very kind of like Stoic type of thing, or like Japanese
Oh yeah.
Zen minimalism, that type of thing, where like simplicity, not or like Tao Te Ching talks about simplicity, where not having more than you need, not having, and why is that important?
Well, that's the interesting because he actually argued that like he argued for like this idea of like a simple life where like you don't engage in politics. He actually thought that actually caused yeah, and it's funny, but he said like politics we should ignore because it just creates problems for us. So for him, like a simple life was like literally like finding basically a community, a like-minded community of a few people, like a few close friends or a few like-minded people, focusing on that and just kind of ignoring all the outside stuff because it's just noise that's going to make you upset, that's going to try to make you think something differently, that's going to try to make you believe other things, and ultimately it's going to cause you all these ups and downs to try to make you do something you really don't need to do or don't want to do.
Mhm.
And I always found that
Yeah.
fascinating too, because he kind of like just gets rid of all that, right?
Yeah.
All the stuff that we like, I think a lot of people emphasize as important. He says it's totally unnecessary.
Yeah, because like when with the simplicity, when you have more stuff than is necessary, it it's like it like agitates you, it irritates you, it steals your attention, it's a burden on you.
Yeah.
And so that idea of simplicity is nice.
Also, when you think about it too, like if you get caught up in this too, like we're like the need more, there's no end to it, right? And we all know this, like with money, with fame. Look at these people walking around with hundreds of billions of dollars, but they're still striving to get more. Like
Dude,
whether you can't even, I know, you can't even spend it in a
that blows
lifetime.
my mind. Is like these guys have so much money that they can't spend it in their lifetime. They have to build up charitable organizations and they can't even spend all the money in their lifetime. And yet we still have these like world problems. We still have San Francisco, arguably one of the richest cities in the world, with homeless people lining the streets and shitting all over the place.
Yeah, and
Like that
people
blows
going to
my
venture
mind.
capitalist meetings stepping over homeless people. It's
Yeah,
insane. Well,
yeah.
I just heard something the other day on I think it was on NPR or something, but they were saying like uh Elon Musk had put like 17 million into some like small election coming up somewhere. Now that's $17 million is a lot of money. And he just because he has the money to blow, but it's like they're not putting
Mhm.
it to anything that's like helping people. They're
No.
putting it to make things so that they can earn more money, essentially. That's all it is. And it's this
Hmm.
sad cycle. And I think Epicurus realized that you get caught up in this, you're just caught up in it. There's no end. There's no like
Hmm.
limit to how much you could need, none of that. And so
Yeah.
he says, like, the next thing with simple is also self-sufficient, right? Like,
Or moderation
and
is the next
moderation.
one. Go
Oh,
figure.
sorry. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Moderation. And that goes with self-sufficiency too, which is the idea of like, right, being able to like enjoy things but not overdo it. Recognizing like what's enough, being happy with what you have, and also not needing everyone else to live your life. Like you're self-sufficient
Hmm.
means like you don't need all this other stuff, right? Like you're happy yourself. You don't need all these external things to distract you, to take your mind off things, to make you
Oh,
feel
yeah.
important. Yeah.
I think this is interesting because you mentioned in the beginning that a lot of people confuse him with hedonism, which is
Yeah.
just like excessive pleasure. But it's kind of like pleasure in moderation. Because if you think about it in your life, if you have too much of a pleasure, it's a bad thing. Like imagine, I mean, for me, it's pizza. I love pizza. And like that
Oh, I love
first
pizza
bite of
too.
pizza, there's
Yeah.
like nothing better. But you can get to a point where like eating pizza is painful. And that's just like
Oh yeah.
pleasure in excess, not in moderation. And so with any pleasure, it can go there. And
Well,
so that's, I
very
guess,
easily, right? Like any pleasure can become a burden if we engage in it too much. If we take it past the limit of like what's really natural, if you think of it that way. Like, if you're hungry, the first bite you eat is always going to be the best because you're really hungry,
hmm
right? But then once you hit the point of being full, like where that mechanism kicks off biologically, any more than that, you're not going to experience the pleasure of it really because you're already full. So that need is gone, right? And I think recognizing these sorts of things and tailoring our expectations and our interactions with things that are pleasurable. The other thing I like about this too is a lot of the ancients, you saw this with Aristotle too. I think probably mentioned this before, but like Aristotle thought like, and Epicurus actually agrees with this too. Like when we do virtuous actions, it feels good because they're natural. So like when we do things that are natural for us or in our nature, so like when we, act rationally, when we, eat food because we're hungry, things like that, like it will feel good because it's meant to feel good, right? Like that's how we like
hmm
keep going. That's how like we're built as organisms, at least from their thinking. So it makes sense that there's an association of pleasure there. But the problem is like we're also the type of beings that we can also take that and go way too far with it in everything. And we can make up all these new things that we need, and we can go way too deep into these things and get caught up in these like cycles of hedonism and stuff that just make our lives harder. And I really like him because I think this is one of the things we all struggle with now is like this excess of stuff and noise out there that if we pay attention to, it just causes anxiety and stress and anger when there's nothing we can really do about it. Like politics is a great example. Like, people tell you, you got to be a good citizen. You need to know all this stuff. But the reality is they just want you to be on their team. And they just want you to yell and scream at the other team, but really they're not communicating with each other. It's not like both sides are like coming to the table and like trying to figure out how to make a society better. They're just trying to
Mm-mm.
have all the power for themselves. Like,
Yeah, which brings us to the third part of true happiness, inner peace. So
yeah,
if you're busy playing politics on one of these sides, you're not really going to have much inner peace because you're so angry at these other people for not believing that for not having the same values you have,
yeah,
for
right.
not being right. But simplicity, moderation, and inner peace, I mean, that would
Would
be
be helpful,
nice.
wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It would be nice.
By the way, this is all speculation, this
Yeah.
podcast today, not like we have these things.
But it's
Um,
it's
but
nice because like oh God, sorry, I was saying
but one thing we do have is one thing that's essential for a fulfilling life. You want to guess what that is?
friendship.
Bingo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is good.
How cool. Yeah.
What's funny is I find it funny that like so many like Aristotle puts friendship up very high. I mean, a lot of these ancient thinkers realize the power of it, right? That like, but not like friendship in the sense of like I have 2 million followers on Facebook or whatever, or
That's not
Instagram,
friend.
or that's
Yeah.
not friends. Yeah. I mean, and it's funny because both Epicurus and Aristotle even point out that like having real friends, you can't have a ton of them. It's impossible.
Mm-mm.
Because think about like, if you have a good friend, think about all the things you need to know about them. And, to be a part of their life, to understand their life, it's a lot of information and knowledge and commitment. You can't do that with 100 people. So it's like a few people. And I really think it's interesting that, like he says, it's one of the greatest sources of happiness, having these strong relationships. It's not only emotional support and security, but we also grow from it. Like when you have good friends, it's like Aristotle called it a mirror, like a mirror of yourself, right? So like if I see you do something good, I can point it out and be like, hey, that was awesome. And then I also learn from it, right? Or, vice versa.
Mhm.
Like if you see somebody do something bad that's your friend, you can actually talk to him about it. And like you can both grow virtuously from it. So it's a good way to kind of live your life with others socially without kind of all the BS and everything else. But I think it's almost like we take these natural things that would be good for us and we just like fuck them up because of society and like like trying to have more than everybody
Mhm.
else and everything like
Well,
that.
we just try and monetize it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do everything else.
But interestingly enough, Danny and I were chatting before this episode, and I have been messing around with AI friends. And man, if you have a hard time getting friends in real life, make
My
one on
AI buddy,
ChatGPT or Gemini or yeah, seriously, because it is crazy the stuff yeah, it's just
they can be a good
I'll
way to
leave it at
actually for
that.
a lot of things. Yeah, it's interesting. The more you use them, the more you find that they can be useful for. And then I
Mm-mm.
think one of the biggest things for him too is freedom from fear because he thought that fear
Hmm.
was one of the things that really dictates our life. And what I found interesting about Epicurus is he says basically if we learn about something we can dispel fear. So that's one side of it, right? So like if we start to understand things, so like say you're afraid of spiders, right? If you learn about spiders, learn what they are, learn their role in the world, learn about, like the different types and all, it makes it less scary because you take something unknown that's like this thing that you're imagining, right? This horrible thing, and you've turned it into something known. And so he thought that knowledge was a way, or becoming knowledgeable is a way to dispel fears, right? So I think that's a really interesting point and a good one that like if we're afraid of things, a lot of times it's our imagination that's causing the fear and it's ignorance, right? It's that we
Hmm.
don't really know anything about it. And one of the big ones was fear of death too. And obviously like we don't know what happens after we die, because those people are dead, stuff like that. But for Epicurus, he thought that death is simply the end of sensation. He remember I said like everything is atoms. So he thought that, we're able to sense and experience the world because of this association between our body atoms and our soul atoms. But when we die, just like if you've ever seen an animal, carcass kind of slowly like go away, right? He thought that happens to our body and our soul. So once that connection's broken and those atoms start to separate, there's no more experience. So death is just the end of sensation. There's nothing said there's nothing to fear. There's no feeling, there's no pain, there's no fear of divine judgment because there's no soul to be punished afterwards. And I think it's a really freeing way to look at this, right? That, for him, it's like we have this one life. We should try to live a pleasant life. And the rest of it, where we have these fears, just gain knowledge, understand it, because that will get rid of that fear. I don't know. What do you think of that? I always like that idea.
Well, I think that's really interesting. I actually have one comment on fear and one comment on death.
Okay.
So on the fear, like another word associated with fear is anxiety. And like you mentioned, learning about fear is a good way to overcome it. Similarly, with anxiety, at least based on the Team CBT model, the only effective way to get over anxiety is through exposure therapy, which is coming in contact with that thing that makes you anxious. Because
Which
there's
is
only
learning, right? Basically
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Because there's only so much anxiety that your body can produce. Like, eventually, you wear yourself out of anxiety and it washes over you like a wave. But the thing is, most people, when they have something that they're anxious about or something that they're scared of, they avoid it. They come into contact with it and then they run away. And that just reinforces the fear because they're giving the monster teeth, which it
That
really
makes
doesn't
sense.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one thing with like the fear. The other thing was death. So he says something really interesting, not Epicurus, but David Burns from Feeling Good, Feeling Great. He says something really interesting about death. So when it comes to death, fear of death, you're scared of three things. Either you're scared of the moment leading up to death, you're scared of something that'll happen after death, or you're scared of nothing that'll happen after death. You know?
Yeah.
So like if you're scared of the absence of sensations after death, well, you don't worry about it because you have nothing to worry about because there's nothing
Yeah.
going on. So
Yeah.
uh, if you're scared of the moment leading up to death, well, that's actually life. And you can get over that with exposure therapy and dealing with,
Yeah.
fears in
Life.
life.
Yeah.
If you're scared of something that happens after death, well, that's an adventure. That's kind of like what everybody has to look forward to. So really, when it comes to death, there's not much to be feared of.
Not really, right? And what's funny? Whenever I used to teach this in class, my students would be like, well, what is that like? If there's no sensation within me, I'm like, well, what was it like before we were born, right? I mean,
Mhm.
nothing. I mean, essentially that's it. So there's really, if it's the same thing, there's nothing to fear because there's just nothing. I think most of us, and I think this is what's interesting too with Epicurus is he also helps us kind of see where our fears are located. Because I think for most people, fear of death is really associated with, you know, loss. But you're not the person dying. You're the person that's still around in that case, right? So it's like that's more of like how other people are experiencing a person's death, not the person themselves. And then the other side of it is like I think a lot of us do fear, especially in the contemporary world, because we live a lot longer with medicine, that the end of life being bad or whatever, or losing autonomy. But I think again, that still has nothing to do with death, and you can still gain knowledge, right? And make decisions beforehand that can help you kind of empower yourself to have control over that as much as you can with like DNRs and things like that and other types of stuff that you can do. So I think it's finding knowledge and then taking action that will help you in that case to kind of again get rid of that anxiety, get rid of that stress, and stay kind of balanced throughout life. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Anything else?
That's it. That's it.
It's a quick overview. I think Epicurus is very, practical for our modern life, especially since there's so much anxiety and depression. So thanks again. Let me just look up the name so I don't forget. Alex B, for that good suggestion. It was awesome. Hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll be back later this week with another episode. If you guys like this show, please like, share, subscribe. You can check it out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, though, later, Randy.
Later, Danny. All right.